I was just watching Professor Anton's video called Redefining, or Defining Reaction, I think it was called. And Corey was pointing out this crucial difference between the human symbolic domain and the natural physical domain. And I certainly agree with the differentiations there, but I think also one could leave having watched Corey's video and think that somehow there was this ontological divide separating the physical world from the symbolic world, the human world from the natural world. And I would want to sort of inquire into this a little bit more with Corey and ask whether there is such a sharp ontological divide between impact on the one hand and image on the other, or matter on the one hand and meaning on the other hand. I think we can avoid a duality here in many ways. One way would be to just draw on the American philosopher Charles Saunders Peirce's semiotics, especially as they have been applied in the field of biosemiotics. And I think one could interpret Peirce ontologically as well. I mean, Peirce seems to interpret himself ontologically. In other words, all physical, natural relationships, including human and non-human relationships, are semiotic in nature. There's always meaning being made and exchanged between all bodies in the universe. Every body is making meaning, not just human bodies, right? And this doesn't mean that we wouldn't make a distinction between the symbolic realm that human beings seem more or less uniquely initiated into. We could distinguish the symbolic, as Peirce did, from these other forms of semioticity, of meaning making, namely indexicality and icons, iconicity, and if we include these other forms of semiotic interaction, it's clear that more than just the human world is meaningful. There aren't simply, I would argue, following other biosemioticians, that there is no there are no meaningless impacts, no meaningless exchanges of physical causes or forces in at least the biological realm, at the very least. So single cells all the way up to complex mammalian primates and human beings. There is meaning at work there. And I think, though it's a more speculative argument, that we could go even further here and say that, there are never just photons meaninglessly meandering through the universe. They're always directional. They're always purposefully acting. Now, a photon's purpose is certainly less complex, less symbolically. It has less symbolic depth and interpretive depth. It's very clear what light wants to do, right? It wants to radiate. But I think this radiation is already, in some sense, the expression of an impulse, right? It's the expression of a desire on some level, and we have to speak cosmologically here about a universe that desires to be, right? And you could easily say that this is just a human animal's way of symbolically representing a physical universe to itself, and that, maybe Corey would accept what I'm saying, but only as a way of speaking, as a way that human beings make sense of the world, and not as a way that the world appears to itself independently of the human. And I can't necessarily escape that sort of self-enclosing, recursive semantic argument. I have to grant that, because again, I've admitted that to do cosmology, to try to articulate a semiotic cosmology or ontology is speculative, right? I have to imagine. I have to engage my imaginative powers in order to make this a possibility. But, you know, if we just accept that that's a given, then how can we as human beings best make sense of our place in this universe? You know, isn't it kind of a little too ironic to end up in that sort of transcendental place of a closed circle of symbolism where we can only refer to other words in our own languages, and so never can we actually escape to know something about the universe? You know, what if we quiet down the symbolic mind for a moment and tap back into those wider fields of semiotic relation, you know, through index and through icons, you know, the way that the rest of the non-human world interacts with itself, because then we start to be more like it, and then from there feeling into animal semioticity and plant semioticity and bacterial semioticity and fungal semioticity. Maybe from that vantage point we can then try to understand the non-living physical world and the way that it interacts with itself semiotically. So, you know, just some ideas I wanted to throw back at Corey to see how he might respond. Yeah, thanks.